On this episode of Pop Culture Weekly, I talk with Ellie Kemper and Zach Cherry about their new show, Great American Baking Show, and I talk with Gan Golan and Al Jenkins about their 1/6 graphic novel. Let's go!
Welcome to Pop Culture Weekly with Kyle McMahon from iHeartRadio. Your pop culture news, views, reviews, and celebrity interviews on all the movies, TV, music, and pop culture you crave weekly. Here's Kyle McMahon.
Hello, and welcome to Pop Culture Weekly with Kyle McMahon. I, of course, am Kyle McMahon, and I'm excited because we have a really great lineup of guests on this episode of Pop Culture Weekly. We have the one and only Ellie Kemper and Zach Cherry. I guess that's the two and onlys. They are the hosts of the Great American Baking Show, which is really a heartwarming, fun show. And if you are unfamiliar with it, it is, I guess, the American take, you could say, on the iconic Great British Bake Off, which, you know, is like a huge series in the UK. And Ellie and Zach Cherry are the hosts of it. So Ellie, I have a very special fondness for Ellie, who I do talk about. It has to do with my mom when she was getting, her cancer treatments. And I do talk to Ellie about that in our interview. So she's so nice. And if you have lived under a rock, Ellie is a super talented actor. Her kind of first, I guess, big role, I would say, is in Bridesmaids. She played Becca in Bridesmaids back in, 2011? Well, now I guess technically The Office. She played Erin Hannon on The Office for 5 seasons or something. So that was, of course, awesome. And then, and she's done so much. But I think the thing that I'm a biggest fan of that she's done, and of course she's amazing in everything, but is Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, which is just hilarious. I love that show, and it has a special fondness in my heart, and it always will. Zach Cherry is another hysterical actor. He's on Severance, by the way, if you like great television. He plays Dylan George on Severance on Apple TV+. He also played Ethan Russell in You on Netflix, which was great, in Succession, and he played in 2 different Marvel Studios films, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings and Spider-Man Homecoming. So anyway, they are the hosts of the brand new series, The Great American Baking Show. So that is exclusively on the Roku channel today. You can watch starting today. Oh, and he was also on Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, by the way. Also today, this is pretty cool. I talk with Gan Golan and Alan Jenkins about their graphic novel 1/6. This graphic novel is really, really thought-provoking. It is really, really well done. What it does is it asks the question, what if the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th succeeded? And it's done in a very interesting, fair way. It's not, it's really done with a lot of heart. It humanizes many of the characters in the series. And I'm really, really happy to talk with them. So they launched the project on Kickstarter, and they killed their goal. So I talk with them. We're going to start out with them. If you are unaware, Alan Jenkins is a professor of practice at Harvard Law School. He teaches on race and the law, Supreme Court jurisprudence, communication. He is a civil rights lawyer, and so I love that he has this, very richly deep way of coming to this story. And he partnered with Gan Golan, who Gan is a visual artist, documentary film maker, graphic novelist. He did a book called Goodnight Bush back in 2008, and The Adventures of an Unemployed Man in 2010, Goodnight Trump in 2018. And he's a New York Times bestselling author. These two powerful creatives came together to make 1/6, which I really, really like. I'll have, there's links in the show notes to buy it. Really powerful and interesting kind of what if scenario. So let's start with my interviews with them, all about 1/6. What if the attack on the U.S. Capitol succeeded? Here they are, Gan Golan and Alan Jenkins. Welcome to iHeartRadio's Pop Culture Weekly. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to talk about this project.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us, Kyle.
Of course.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Of course. So first of all, this graphic novel is incredibly powerful, and it asks the question, what would happen if the insurrection was, or the insurrectionists were successful on January 6th? Give me in your words, what this truly is about and why it was done.
Well, I can start, and I guess I can start with the second part of your question. This is Alan. So, Kyle, literally in the days and weeks after the January 6th, 2021 insurrection, I found myself waking up in the middle of the night or at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, worrying about our democracy and worrying about the fact that all of the threats that led to the January 6th attack and the scheme that was behind it are still with us, and some of them have gotten worse. The threats to democracy, to voting, to the truth, disinformation, the kind of bigotry and hate that drove a lot of the insurrection, the threat of political violence are all still with us. Some of them have gotten worse, and yet it seemed that the country wanted to move on. Already we were seeing revisionist history, news stories about, well, they were just tourists or what have you. So, I was looking for a way to sound the alarm bell, but in a way that would reach everyday people who maybe don't have time to, read the 800 plus page, House committee report, or, aren't glued to political news shows. And I love comics. And so that seemed like a great vehicle. It's a well-worn path, as we'll probably talk about, for telling important stories. And so I turned to Gan, who has actually, written and created and produced a number of highly successful graphic novels. And he thought it was a good idea, which made me think, well, maybe I'm onto something. So Gan, I'm sure, has more to say about that.
And just for the record, Alan, you are a Harvard law professor. You've worked various social justice projects in throughout your entire career. Gan, you are a best-selling author, and then that's where you come into this, right?
Yeah, and I have a long history as an organizer and an activist, and I'm always looking for ways in which art and culture can really move the needle and start, make us have the conversations we're avoiding and we really need to have. And this was just such an amazing premise that I immediately said yes to Alan, and we were sort of off to the races, and realizing we sort of had like a two-fisted attack here on this subject. One, we were going to use the power of dystopian fiction to tell the story of what could have happened had the insurrectionists succeeded. And that gives us a lot of latitude to really name the kind of future that we narrowly avoided, but is also still there if we don't continue to work to avoid it. And that's, I think, one of the most powerful things that dystopian fiction has done in our society, whether it's Handmaid's Tale or 1984 or all of these things. It really paints a picture of the looming threats that are out there. And at the same time, we wanted to ground it in fact. There is so much information that has come out about what happened on January 6th, not just the physical violence on the mall, but all the behind the scenes maneuvering, the attempts to completely replace our democratic process with something completely different. We wanted to tell that factual story too. So we come in on the factual side. We can get into that. It's very carefully researched, but we're also coming in on the speculative side, to really say, look, this hasn't happened, but it also hasn't happened yet. And we need to make some very serious choices of how we want to move forward as a society and as a country. Because if we're not careful, what happened on January 6th is going to either reoccur in another form, or in truth, it never really stopped. And that's why we needed to sound the alarm.
I love that, why that came about. Obviously, I hate the fact that it needs to come about. And to both of your points, it really is kind of continuing to happen in a lot of ways. I'm sure you saw the bill in Texas that is looking to, and I don't even have a political show, but this is, art that we're talking about. And in my opinion, great art reflects what is going on in society. And I'm sure you saw the recent bill in Texas that has the handpicked Secretary of State ultimately having a final say, essentially, in elections there. And from my understanding, one county, which is a blue county, which I find interesting. So it kind of is, in my opinion, continuing to kind of happen, rippling throughout, the rest of government, No,
I think that's right. And, there are 150, actually over 150 election deniers in Congress today, right? So people who voted against the actual results of the election, who in that way supported the insurrection. And by the way, we're sending them all a free copy of this comic book.
I love that.
I'm sure many of your listeners know that Saturday is Free Comic Book Day, one of my favorite holidays. And so we are sending a free comic book to all the election deniers in Congress, or at least over 150 of them, and also to some of the supporters of democracy in both parties, people who stood up for the truth and for democracy. And, we'll see what they do with it.
I also heard that you guys are sending a copy to a person who has a very huge rodent problem on their hands. Is that true?
Well, we are sending copies, as Alan said, to lots of folks who may not agree with the subject matter, but we are sending copies to, for example, to Ron DeSantis.
Yeah.
And to libraries across Florida. And, he has a habit of banning books that tell truths he doesn't like. So, if all goes well, he'll try and ban our book. And we're sort of daring him to do that. And but really, these are the kinds of places where these conversations need to be happening more. And so we're really trying to bring this story, into people's dinner table, into the classrooms where people can really talk about what happened from a historical perspective, and then ask the big questions about our, do we want to do what it takes to preserve our democracy in this country? From all the threats that we're seeing. And you named what happened, in Texas. I have family in Texas, and we have seen how after January 6th, some of these states continue to be test cases where they are seeing how far can we go with this. January 6th was a teachable moment. It was a learning moment. And the question is, who's learning from it? And what we see is a lot of the folks who enacted, the insurrection have learned a lot from it. They didn't take failure as an end to what they're doing. They're now trying to continue to experiment with how you circumvent our normal democratic processes. And the question is, are the rest of us learning from it? Is it a teachable moment for us where we're really looking at what it's going to take to defend democracy from these attempts to subvert it?
Yeah, similar to, as you were stating earlier, Alan, when, I remember watching January 6th on TV and was horrified at what was happening. And it reminded me of what, in many ways to 9/11, where it's a terrorist attack on our country. And, I think some people tend to refrain from using that word, and that to me is exactly what it is terrorism. And similarly, I thought that as a country we would kind of group together and be against terrorists, but in this timeline that we're living in, that didn't happen. It was, as you both kind of stated, narratives changed or were being attempted to change them, misinformation, and it kind of emboldened a group of people more, which again, I feel like this is like a weird timeline that I'm living in, that in any like normal world that wouldn't happen. We would all come together and be like, no, you do this, and you are, prosecuted, and everybody is in agreement about that. And that is not what has happened, clearly.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, one of the reasons why our graphic novel series is called 1/6 is the parallel to 9/11. I was living in New York City and working in Manhattan on 9/11, 2001. My wife and I had to, flee the city, walking across the Manhattan Bridge, past a smoking, World Trade Center. And so we appropriately honor the people who were lost every year, as we have for, now 22 years. And yet, our democracy was almost overthrown just, a couple of years ago, and we don't give it that kind of reverence or warning. It was a terrorist attack, as you note, and it was at least as grave. Lives were lost. Not as many lives were lost, thankfully, as on 9/11, but lives were lost. Our fundamental values as Americans were challenged, and we need to start acting that way.
Yeah, and I love that that this piece starts that conversation in many ways. And what I think will is interesting. And I'm curious on your take on this. People will say, if they haven't already, and I'm sure they have, that, comics are whatever, stick to comics. Comics shouldn't be in politics and all that, which I laugh at because, it was Captain America was like fighting Nazis. That was like his whole origin story. I mean, it has always reflected life. What is your take, both of your takes? What is your takes on that?
Yeah, it's always really funny when it says, comic books shouldn't be political. They're basically revealing that they don't really know the history of comics, which was often at the very forefront of the political conversations we were having in this country. Just a quick review. There was the character named Superman, by Siegel and Schuster. And these two Jewish immigrants wrote a story of a working class hero who basically would go around punching corrupt capitalists and holding them to account. And that's why he was so popular during the Great Depression, because he really was expressing people's desire for justice in a time there was so much income inequality. He again fought the KKK in the 1950s, just overtly against white supremacy. Captain America, Simon and Kirby, famously punching Hitler in the face. This was and important to note, that was before the United States had actually entered World War II. And there was an active Nazi party in the United States. And the creators, faced threats for the what they were producing. I think it was Timely Comics at the time who was producing it. They were getting direct threats to their offices. So comics creators were stepping out, they were standing up, and they were, making sure that their comics were saying what needs to be said. So there's a long history. There's a march by John Lewis and Nate Powell about MLK and the Montgomery bus boycotts, that was translated into so many languages that it actually found its way into the hands of activists in Egypt during the Arab Spring. So comics actually became a way to communicate the civil rights struggle to other countries who were engaged in their own struggles for freedom and democracy. There's just so many examples that we could keep going. Alan, I don't know if you want to throw in some more, but it's a very proud tradition, and we are working firmly within that tradition.
Yeah, I would just add that as both of you have said, comic books are inseparable from social issues and politics, both the politics of the day and kind of indelible politics. To my left, I actually have a wall of great comic books dealing with social issues. The Black Panther fighting the Klan, the first same-sex kiss in comic books, which was a while back. Just a remarkable tradition. And then, there's the metaphorical, representation of social issues. X-Men, being a stand-in for all kinds of bigotry, right? Racism and homophobia and anti-Semitism and others. So many of these stories. Even you think about Spider-Man and the Hulk. You can tell I'm a Marvel guy.
Me too.
Spider-Man and the Hulk. Continue. Who are they often chased by? Right, harassed by police and the military. And this is during the the lead up to the Vietnam War, and so the notion that good guys can sometimes be misunderstood, that the police and the authorities can sometimes get it wrong. Those are super important. All those Spider-Man villains who are his friends, his family members, the people around him, the notion that you have to love your enemy and that with great power comes great responsibility. Those are inherently human rights oriented notions that Stan Lee and Steve Ditko and others built in to their superheroes. So yeah, we ought to just stop saying that that comic books have not been historically political.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
Let me give one last shout out. The main artist on the comic book is Will Rosado, who's just done an incredible job with it. If you haven't seen the comic in person, get a copy. It's really just beautiful and sophisticated, the way it all sort of comes together on the page. And Will, actually, we met him because he was working on a title called La Borinqueña, which is a Puerto Rican superhero that sort of rises in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. And we were looking for artists who already had some experience with social justice work, and of course there's a lot out there. But shout out to Will, and there's a lot of folks who are still doing great stuff with the medium.
Well, and what I find fascinating to me is, and I was just having this conversation. So on the last episode of the show, I talked with the cast of Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, the film, and I talked to Judy Blume, and she was saying, 50 years ago they were banning that book, and then she said then it started being, kind of died down, and then in the 80s it was starting to get banned everywhere again, and now once again, it's being banned all over, and is in fact one of the top 100 most banned books in America. And you're talking about like periods and religion and stuff like that, where these are things that happen to many people, and it's done in a age appropriate way in that case, and yet you have these people that say, stay out of this, stay out of politics. Artists should just do art. Singers should just sing. The Dixie Chicks are a great example of that. And I think they miss the bigger picture that, one, these are, presumably tax-paying citizens, the Dixie Chicks and Judy Blume and all, that have a right as a citizen to, that First Amendment that often gets, in my opinion, overshadowed by the second one from certain groups, and they have that right to do that. And secondly, art has always done that since the beginning of time, has reflected what we as humans are going through, experiencing, collective experiences, whether it be people of color and their collective experience in America throughout history, whether it be trans people today, whatever it is, there are artists that reflect that in their art. That's kind of, in my opinion, what art is, and it's kind of crazy to me that whether we're talking about a book, whether we're talking about a graphic novel, comic books, whether we're talking about music, there's always this kind of, horrible Greek chorus of people that say, because they don't agree with it, be an artist, stick to singing, stick to, whatever the case might be. You know what I mean? It really, I feel like we get so far and then get pushed back so much further,
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. You mentioned Greek chorus. The Greek classics were political, right?
Mhm.
Shakespeare was political and still is, right, in ways that are relevant to questions of power and ambition and disinformation. You find all of that in those old stories. But I think it's also important, and one of our big goals was to make sure that this would be a compelling, entertaining, character-driven drama. Nobody wants to just read the comic book version of a speech or of the House Committee's report. Maybe some people do, but that's not what we wanted to produce. I mean, we really wanted to create something that people would be, enjoy reading, that would be interesting, with ups and downs. We were very intent on having empathy for everyone, all of our characters. There's a MAGA voter character who I hope we've treated with dignity, even though we disagree with many of that character's views, and some of the characters disagree amongst themselves. So that part's really important too. I think that we can't just slap a comic book cover on something and call it pop culture. We've really tried to respect the medium, the storytelling medium of comics as well.
And I think you've both done that incredibly, I mean, because as you said, most people, I think, don't want to just be preached to. And what better way to start that conversation than an entertaining story? It has a good story at its center. And then through that good story, it allows the broader conversation, which I think is so important. For you, there were for both of you, there were many ways that you could have gone with the story when you're doing a kind of dystopian what if sort of future. Why did you choose, and I'm trying to be as spoiler free as possible, why did you choose the way you both chose?
Gan, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, and just to be clear, like by dystopian, we don't mean hopeless. They're very, not to give too much away, this is very much a story of hope and resistance. And how do we reckon with that if that reality happened or were to happen? And how do we find heroism amongst ourselves as everyday people? And so we created 4 characters, as Alan was referring to, these fictional characters who are really amalgams of real people. We've drawn a lot on real people who survived the insurrection, people who participated in the insurrection, and we have them experience the events of January 6th and beyond personally, because we wanted to show how this large, seemingly abstract political thing about democracy actually impacts our lives, and just doesn't just do harm to the country, can do tremendous harm to people themselves. And so our characters experience that, and then have to make their own choices about what they want to do as things unfold in this alternate timeline. But that was very important to us, that we took a character-driven approach. We have 4 characters. One is Nia, a nurse and first responder whose husband is a Capitol police officer who is actually killed during this alternate timeline of January 6th. We have Sage, who's a Congolese-born immigrant who's been working as an independent journalist for decades, but has seen enough in his own country to be able to recognize the signs of what is happening here, and sort of has a lot of foresight and to the events. We have Autumn, a congressional staffer who firmly believes in our democratic system, and then narrowly escapes with her own life. And then we have Clive, a MAGA supporter who is dragged into the events of January 6th for very personal reasons, for family reasons and things like that. But each of these characters have a deep emotional investment in what's happening, and are forever changed by the events of January 6th. And we think that is a reflection of what has happened to the country and what we face moving forward.
My godson, Aiden, who I adore, he is mixed. He is, his father is white, his mother is black. And he said something to me that was so profound, and I'll relate it back to what you just said, Gan, in a moment. But I forget, we were watching Into the Spider-Verse, which features Miles Morales, who is a groundbreaking character and an awesome character. And he said, because Aiden's got the, little fro going and he's got mixed skin, and he said, for the first time, I see a comic book character that looks like me. And I thought to myself, my mind was blown. I with my own, privilege and ignorance, never had to worry about that because so many of them for so long, and when more specifically in movies and television and that sort of thing, looked like me. And so I never had a moment in my life where I said, for the first time, I see a character that looks like me, and it was so important to him. And I could see like kind of the happiness on his face as we're watching this film. And it really hit home for me how important not only, of course, representation is in all media, but especially when you can relate to that person or that person's story being told or whatever. And that is kind of a vehicle that you guys have used ingeniously in this to be everyday people. It could be me, it could be my neighbor, it could be my whatever, wife, coworker, or whatever, and use that to tell these stories. Obviously, in the broader story of what's happening in DC there. I think that it's done so well, and I think that, similarly, you will have people that read this that are looking at it because of the great reviews or whatever, and then say to themselves, wait a second, there's a moment with them where they are like, I didn't think about it this way, or I didn't think about it that way or whatever. And I think that's a very big achievement, especially with a topic like this, where it is so charged in certain circles. And I just thought I would point that out because I think it is such a powerful and important thing that both of you have done with that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kyle. I think, as to the representation point, it's one of the reasons why so many comic book superheroes have their, young sidekicks, right? Is so that kids who, at least back in the day, were the ones reading comic books, would be able to see someone like themselves. But of course, they were not diverse. I remember as a kid, and I used to have one of those afros too. Your listeners can't see me, but I no longer do. I remember clinging to, just a deep cut, but like there was a black character, Robbie Robertson, I believe, was his name, on Spider-Man, right? Who worked for J. Jonah Jameson. And I remember, he had a son who ended up being a villain. He was the Prowler, I want to say.
Yeah.
Fans don't hate on me if I got that wrong. But I just remember how exciting that was to me as a black teenager, being able to see this black teenage character who, true to Spider-Man form, was not evil. He was just kind of, confused. And, same with Black Panther. Same with, with Wonder Woman, a lot of the, second wave feminists of the 1970s, Gloria Steinem and the like, point to Wonder Woman that they read back in the day as an inspiration. And the first issue of Ms. Magazine has Wonder Woman on the cover. So it really does matter a lot. I also want to make sure I get in early that I think by the time this airs, the book will be available on Amazon. And also, I hope that people will go into their comic book stores and say, you got to order 1/6, the graphic novel. There's going to be 4 parts to it. And it's going to be available everywhere, we hope.
And God, do you have any anything in your experience why that was important to you?
Yeah, it's interesting. So what I think part of what so many stories do is they talk about outsiders and underdogs. I grew up my parents were Jewish, and I grew up, and immigrants, so it was very in Los Angeles, and so I was often as someone who's almost white, so close to like mainstream, but often feeling alienated from it. And so these stories were really important. I grew up on X-Men, for example, which was just such a metaphor for, and I also grew up in a very political family, very activist family. And so those, as Alan mentioned, those themes were so strongly in that, like if you didn't recognize them, you were blind. These were groups of marginalized people fighting for survival, first of all, of their community, and second of all, fighting against injustice. And of course, my family were Holocaust survivors, and that was a actual key feature of the X-Men story. And I was growing up in the 70s and 80s where we were seeing a lot of refugees coming in from Central America, fleeing U.S.-funded, covert wars against their democratically elected governments. And my parents were the caretakers of a church that was actually giving refuge to people who were fleeing. And so, for me, the comic books were actually just a way of naming as a child what I was already seeing out there in the world and creating a heroic story. I think that's one of the great things, is these stories actually, show us that everyday people, we can find our superhero powers, or we can just find our purpose, but we really can fight, often collectively, the Avengers, the X-Men, these groups coming together to fight against these injustices. And so as a young person, as a young activist, like superhero stories, comic book stories, they were a huge source of inspiration that we took directly into our work of being activists and organizing people.
I love that. Thank you both so much for speaking with me. 1/6, the graphic novel, is out now, as this episode airs, and available on Amazon and hopefully in your local comic store, right?
Yeah, it's going to take a little while to hit comic stores, and demand matters. So I hope people will be asking for it. And also, folks can go to 16comics.com. It's ONESIX comics.com. We have an education and action guide. So people who are inspired by the book can actually learn more and take action to protect our democracy. We did that with a group called the Western States Center, and they can also sign up for updates there. So in addition to Amazon, nag your comic book stores and your bookstores, and go to 16comics.com.
I love that. Thank you both so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time. There you go. Really, really, really fascinating. I think art always reflects what's going on in the world, whether that be politics or societal or whatever it is. And great art does that. So really interesting, no matter what side of the aisle you are on. I think, it is a very interesting thought piece as a graphic novel. So head to the show notes. You can get that now. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I talk with the hosts of Great American Baking Show, Ellie Kemper and Zach Cherry. All right. Thank you for allowing us to pay the bills and keep this show going. Let's get right into it. I'm really, really excited for you to hear my interview with Ellie and Zach about the Great American Baking Show. Here we are, Ellie Kemper and Zach Cherry. Thank you so much for joining me on iHeartRadio's Pop Culture Weekly. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. So this series, I love it. It brings me joy because I'm so horrible at cooking and baking and anything like that. So I love to see, first of all, people that are in many ways extremely talented at this. But also, there's some I don't want to say failures, but there's some there you go, missteps. That's a perfect word for it, along the way. How is it for both of you to kind of see, all sides of these contestants?
It was really fun to watch because I will speak for myself. I also am not a good baker or cook. I think Zach is an amazing baker, is a vibe I picked up from him.
You have no evidence to suggest that, but sure, yeah.
You carry yourself as a competent man, and I thought, well, maybe also
I'll say C++.
B minus.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
not terrible.
Pass.
I'm a solid D.
Passing grade.
Yeah.
It's still passing.
Yeah.
But watching these bakers bake was really inspiring because I thought of them as surgeons. I felt like I could hand them again, it was Paul and Prue who were setting all the challenges, of course, but like they were unflappable. You could throw them anything their way. They weren't given recipes. Like they were given like make a coulis.
Right.
And they just did it.
And artists. Like everything was like thematically linked and like tied to like a personal story from their childhood.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And I was, similarly, if you had given me the same task, I would be like, here is a brownie. Like that would be the end. So yeah, it was very impressive.
Yeah.
And you brought up a great point, Ellie, like make a coulis. Like I'd have to Google that, I don't know what that is. It sounds like a little drink that I would take to the beach or something. So
exactly.
Yeah, it does.
Because I always thought for some reason watching it, I thought, they have more explicit directions or instructions, and they don't.
Yeah, on the technical challenges, the instructions literally just say like, make the dish and then like bake it.
Yeah.
Like there's no temperature or time
or amounts. Maybe exactly.
It's very, very limited guidance.
Yeah.
And you can't like use Google or anything to assist you.
No.
Yeah,
they don't know it ahead of time, right?
They would sometimes ask me, not seriously, because they knew I couldn't help them.
Right.
Jokingly, and if anything, I could hurt them. There's no way I could help.
No. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So this is, the original in the UK is one of, probably the most celebrated food-related show in television history, and now it's coming, or it is here for U.S. audiences. What does it feel like to be a part of such a cherished and revered franchise?
Really lucky.
Yeah,
because I do think this is a show. I'll speak as an audience member that brings people joy. It's a uplifting, entertaining. This show that has heart. So I feel like, I don't know, it's a lucky piece to be a part of.
And stepping into something with such a history, at least I am sort of just like, I hope we did a good job, because it is something that people like so much, and you want it to feel the way people want it to feel, of fun and comforting and those kind of things. So, and it's also very surreal, like when you first walk into the tent and see everything laid out that you've seen on TV. So it's there's a lot of reaction, a lot of emotions go into stepping into it.
Yeah.
I love that. And, the series also features the two original OGs with, this famed restaurateur and this famed celebrity chef, which would make me even more nervous, I think. What was it like working with those two, and in the American version of the show?
They were great. They were very, they, as you said, they're such old pros at it, they were very welcoming and brought us in and like were encouraging and all these kinds of things, even though maybe, on the show, they might seem a little scary in terms of bringing us along. I felt very, very welcomed and helped by that.
Yes. They could not have been more welcoming. They're like, if I hope they know how big an impact their show has on people and their judging does. But if they do, they carry themselves very humbly, which is nice.
And, as it's playing out, you got to see and know, a lot of the stories of these people, which is, as you mentioned, Zach, there's some really powerful stories behind this. How do you as hosts kind of keep as what's the word I'm trying to say? Keep as non-biased or whatever as possible. Like I feel like I'd want to root for, you made me cry. Now I want you to, how do you do that?
Honestly, for me, I was rooting for all of them in in their each individual bakes and moments, like, because we did spend a lot of time with them over the course of the season, and like it's also they're rooting for each other, so that makes it kind of easier because everyone was just so excited to be baking. And like I think for some of them, baking is often done kind of alone, and the people in their lives maybe aren't as obsessed with baking as the other bakers on the show.
Yes.
So it was a very exciting moment to like nerd out with other bakers. So that kind of made it easier to just root for everyone because they were all just like, making amazing stuff and excited to be there.
Do you remember I suggested to one of the producers or asked, I was like, I think I suggested, I was like, I think it'd be a really good idea for us, for Zach and me and all the bakers to grab lunch so we get to know each other. And they were like, oh, that's a nice idea. No, because like, that's, what is it? What's the word I'm looking for? Where you're like
a conflict or something.
Yeah.
And that we might choose favorites
to help keep us impartial.
Exactly.
Sure.
So, and I was like, oh, interesting. So that kept us sort of, apart from them, so that I guess we wouldn't be whispering in Paul's and Prue's ears, like, I really like Nirali.
But the benefit of not being the judges is even if we were rooting for someone, it would have had no impact.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
No, they're exactly. We don't really have the power to sway.
Right.
And it seems like it was fun too, jumping out of a cake. Like the last time I jumped out of a cake, I got quarters thrown at me and the other half booed. But like, you guys did a lot of funny, and fun things with this. What was your favorite moments for
well,
you?
First of all, I want to hear that story of you jumping out of a cake.
I had to pay for college,
Yes.
it really was all fun.
Yeah.
The cake moment was good. I had forgotten we did that.
Do you remember? It was so weirdly hot. I just remember that day being very hot, but it was so, I don't know why that came up as a memory, but yes, the whole thing was pleasant and drama free.
Every day at like 4, about 300 rabbits would come out of this is serious.
This is serious.
Literally every day in the afternoon around the same time, 300 might be an exaggeration, but like 70 rabbits would pop out of the woods from around the tent and just kind of hang out. So that was always a nice part of the day. It was
a nice little part of the day. It helped us keep track of time. It was, I still don't know I guess it's their feeding time.
I don't know.
But they would come out regularly at 4 o'clock, which made it very, I don't know, Englandy, authentic.
That was fun.
But also I really liked tasting the bakes, because after all was said and done, they offered the bakes to, anyone who wanted them. So that was nice.
Red Week was a highlight in terms of
was
taste
really good
for me.
Yeah. Imagine really well baked stuff. It's not like they're good at what you do.
Yeah. That's like a dream for me. It's like, every morning at Dunkin' Donuts, but better.
Much better. Well, maybe not as good. No, I'm kidding.
When you're doing this, is there ever, and you don't have to get specific, but is there, maybe there's something you don't like. I'm just making this up, peanut butter or something. And, here's where you're tasting everybody's things. And you're like, did that ever kind of come up or?
I remember on, I think maybe Pie Week, I was skeptical of cheese on top of pie. I'd never had that.
Yeah,
before.
Susan was making that.
And that's, I think in certain regions, that's like a traditional thing, but I'd never had it. So I was a little skeptical, but pretty good.
I'm going to say it was pretty good.
Yeah.
I think more so for Paul and Prue, with maybe not that they're not familiar with American desserts, but maybe some things such as peanut butter.
Yeah.
Like, wasn't Martin making a peanut buttery thing? And I asked them, well, how do you judge that impartially if you just don't like peanut butter? And I don't know what his answer was.
But there were certain ingredients that they normally don't like that they did have to taste. I remember corn being
yeah.
There was a lot of skepticism around a particularly corn-heavy dish.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess as a judge, you got to just take off your taste hat and put on your like technique hat
your
or
technique hat,
something. Yeah.
right, which is always close by.
Yeah, you gotta keep it within arm's reach.
Oh yeah, both hats.
And as host, I guess you got, I don't want to say the pleasure of, but you could tastefully, I mean, that's a horrible analogy to use, but tastefully kind of, as you said, like, you're a little bit hesitant about it, but, it's not like in the end it really matters to the competition.
Right.
Yeah, we kind of had the best of both worlds in that we could try anything we wanted, but we didn't have to.
Right.
Yeah.
So if there was anything that like really was, a no-go, we just wouldn't have to try it. But anything that looked good or maybe earned a handshake, I was right in there as soon as they were ready for it.
Was there anything that both of you, were like, oh, I want to take some extra back to my trailer? Or wherever hotel, wherever you're staying.
Yeah. What?
Bread week.
Bread week.
I enjoyed all the breads. They were very varied. Really, anytime there was like a new thing, I was usually
intrigued. Yes, yeah. I think there was one showstopper. Martin made like a banana. It was an all-American type dessert, and this is not helpful because I can't remember the specific ingredients. But it was like a malt shoppy type thing. Oh my gosh, this is not.
So just summarize, there was one day where somebody made something.
And that's my.
And that was.
That's excellent. It's excellent. Both of you have worked, I believe, worked together in the past. You were both part of. Oh my God, I'm totally drawing a blank.
No, we both did improv to get together, and we. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, not at the same. We weren't like on a team together. But
okay, so it wasn't at the same. It wasn't at the same time.
Same time, but not together. But we did work together before on Kimmy Schmidt.
Kimmy Schmidt. Yeah.
Right.
I didn't that long ago.
Yes,
where I had I had to wheel out a wheelbarrow full of puppies.
Yes.
I was essentially unable to act because I had to make sure the puppies didn't jump out of the wheelbarrow. That was like my job for the day. They would climb up to the perimeter, and I would have to then kind of gently shake it so that they would stay in rather than
without harming the puppies. Yeah. That's a very separate job.
Yeah.
From acting.
Yeah.
But that's the time we worked together.
Yes.
Okay.
But we come from the same world of improv.
Well, yeah, and you guys mesh, so well together. And that's why I had kind of assumed that that you had, you guys click, which I love. That
was really nice. And as the season went on, they let us, like, I don't know. I hope it's enjoyable for people other than us. But we got to just like riff more. I don't know. They did a lot of sections with us just off talking in a corner, which is fun. I think we have similar sensibilities.
Yeah. So. And coming from that world, even though we hadn't necessarily improvised together before, we kind of speak the same language of, yeah.
Improviser, I don't know.
Exactly.
Does that sound annoying?
We struggle to complete the same sentences. Rather than completing each other, we both sort of trail off in the same moments.
Rather than we interrupt each other and then don't finish sentences.
Yeah.
It
takes a lot of training together.
Yeah. It's the same world.
Yeah.
Same world.
Well, I love it. It is so enjoyable to watch. The two of you are incredible to watch. As I said, you've clicked, you click so well together. And I can't wait for everybody to see it. Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thank you for talking with us. We're excited for everybody to see it too.
Yeah,
it's such a great, fun, heartwarming series. And on a kind of personal note, I just wanted to say, Ellie and Zach, Kimmy Schmidt. So my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and I had seen an episode of Kimmy Schmidt, and I was just laughing hysterically. So I said, Mom, this was at the beginning of her treatments. I said, Mom, you got to watch this show with me. And she's like, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, just watch. And within 5 minutes, she was laughing hysterically. And that became, through her treatments, Kimmy Schmidt became a really vital part of me and hers journey.
Oh,
and
yes.
and she passed, but I have her ring. She passed, and those are such fond memories of. It was a light in a really dark time, and I just thank you. You know, as actors, I'm sure both of you sometimes probably don't realize there's the art that you do can really affect people in amazing ways, and that's one of them. One of my mom and I's things was the scene where just keep going, just if you can do this for 5 seconds or whatever, yeah. And so I would send her a GIF, like on the phone when she'd be like, I'm having a bad day. I would send her that GIF from that scene, and it just became like a really huge thing for me and her on her cancer journey. And so, thank you.
Thank you for letting us know that. Yeah. I'm glad that could be of some comfort during that time. And I'm so sorry to hear about your mom. And I'm thinking of you, and I'm glad that brought some relief during a very difficult time.
Thank you very much. It really did. I mean, when you're dealing with that for her, that 25 minutes of laughing makes all the difference in the world. It really does.
That too with I know that feeling because it really is an escape with other shows and pieces of art, that it really is an escape. So I think we both feel lucky that we can bring that some sense of comfort. But I'm glad to hear that she was able to laugh.
Absolutely. It was such a highlight during that time. So in a time with not a lot of highlights. So thank you so much. I totally didn't mean to start crying. I was just I'm
thankful to you for letting us know and sharing that.
Of course. Yeah. And thank you both so much for your time. I can't wait for everybody to see the series.
Also, I think it's an example of a show that brings people a lot of relief. And it's a nice show. It just is sweet and uplifting, and you get into the competition piece of it, but it's hard. It's just it's a show about camaraderie, I think, and lifting each other up. So
absolutely. Nice. And that's what great art does at the end of the day, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly.
Thank you both so much. Have a great day. I really appreciate it.
You too. And our condolences.
Thank you. Like legitimately that I was crying in that interview. Ellie was crying. It was, I just love her, and Zach Cherry is amazing. And Great American Baking Show is a fun, lighthearted, heartwarming competition that is available now exclusively on the Roku channel. All right, that is all for this week. I love you. We've got some really, really, really exciting stuff coming up next. Next week, Kate Mara and the cast of Class of '09. And the week after, who knows? Maybe I'll interview, I don't know, Jane Fonda or something. And who knows? Maybe the week after that, I don't know, Robert De Niro. You never know who's going to turn up on Pop Culture Weekly. But no matter who does turn up, I appreciate you for always hanging out with me and making this show grow, sharing it with your friends, giving a review on Apple Podcasts. I love it all. It helps the show grow, and I love you for it. All right? I'll see you next week. I love you. We out.
Thank you for listening to Pop Culture Weekly. Hear all the latest at popcultureweekly.com.
Kimmy Schmidt, she's unbreakable, yeah. Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. Ooh.